In Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need, Blake Snyder writes, "A common mistake in a lot of rough drafts is the problem of the inactive hero. Your hero is being dragged through the story, showing up when he's supposed to, but for no reason. Your hero seems unmotivated, his goal vague, the driving force that should be guiding him is MIA. Snyder proceeds to lay out a checklist of 4 basic questions to solve the problem of the inactive hero. Number 1, is your hero's goal clearly stated in the setup? Number 2, do clues of what to do next just come to your hero, or does he seek them out? Number 3, is your hero active or passive? Number 4, do other characters tell your hero what to do, or does he tell them? I won't be the first person to say that Save the Cat can be overly didactic, but these are still pretty good rules for any writer. And they're also rules that American Gods seems to break.
When they set off, they dreamt of the riches they would accumulate, the fat-breasted women they would send for. Their dreams changed to bread, roasted meats, even a salad would do.
How do you make a compelling hour-long prestige drama out of the story of a man who has no comprehension of the story he's in? Shadow Moon, protagonist of American Gods, doesn't get more than 5 minutes on screen before all his expectations are shattered by the sudden death of his wife just days before he's set to be released from prison. From there, he proceeds to be befuddled, corralled, captured, saved, and insulted by half a dozen characters who know more about what's going on than he does. He has no goal, he never seeks clues, his passivity is only impeded by brute force, and the entire show so far is dedicated to telling Shadow what to do without giving him a good reason why. Shadow Moon is a textbook inactive hero, exactly the kind of character your English teacher would tell you to give some verbs. According to Blake Snyder, whose books are some of the most well-regarded introductory guides to screenwriting on the market, Shadow should be an unrelatable hero whose isolation from the plot makes American Gods as a whole at best unpalatable and at worst a complete mess. And yet, it works. Against all odds, American Gods is a fascinating fantasy drama, dripped in intrigue and laid out to dry under the glow of string lights. So how is this accomplished? How is it so successful at drawing you into its strange parallel world while committing such a seemingly basic cardinal sin of screenwriting?
What should I call you if I was so inclined?
Shadow Moon.
Oh my boy, that is one outstandingly improbable name. Shadow Moon? Moon Shadow. Goddamn hippie parents.
So let's be clear, it's not unusual for a genre story to have a protagonist with next to no knowledge of the world they've become immersed in. This setup allows your character to ask questions that the audience might be asking themselves, giving you a little more license to exposit basic concepts like setting, allegiance, religion, what have you. Think of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, a dumb kid who's never been off his moisture farm. He's every bit the convenient fish out of water, but he's also driven by a desire to make more for himself, even if he doesn't quite yet know what that means. Luke may know next to nothing about the galaxy at large, but that doesn't stop him from having opinions or judging the people around him who do stuff he disagrees with. Despite his inexperience, he's still a citizen of the world, and his relative neutrality eventually gives way once he becomes more experienced. Shadow Moon is unique in that he has no driving aspiration and seemingly no particular interest in the mechanics of the world he's found himself in, besides how leprechauns do coin tricks. The one thing he wanted has been taken away from him, and he seems perfectly content to just piddle dick around with Mr. Wednesday until something better shows up. Shadow is confused by the strange events occurring around him, certainly, and by episode 2 he does start asking questions, but his questions aren't mined for exposition. When Shadow asks for a fucking clue, he isn't given one, and the matter is mostly left unresolved. Instead, this moment is used as an expression of character, showing Shadow's frustration with his present circumstances, less in how little they make sense than in how they are endangering him physically, and then showing Wednesday's pointed effusiveness and desire to keep Shadow in the dark. This attitude is even acknowledged explicitly within the show when Zoria Polinochnia peers into Shadow's head and says,
"You have nothing. You believe in nothing, so you have nothing."
Shadow's defining character trait is literally nothing. While this may be true to the book, it remains a risky writing choice. There's a good chance that an audience unfamiliar with the source material might be alienated by a story that refuses to clarify its weirdness, hinged as it is on a character so disconnected from a normal curiosity about the goings-on around him. So if Shadow is an insufficient entry point into the mythology of American Gods, shouldn't the show be a non-starter?
I'm asking you, what do you know about a slaughtered lynch mob?
I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what the fuck you speak of. I don't know what
American Gods is a big, weird book that doesn't on its face feel suited for adaptation. Even without talking about theme, you have a hard time just explaining what it's about. Look at other shows for comparison. Lost has a great logline. Survivors of a crashed plane struggle to escape a haunted island. Breaking Bad, a high school chemistry teacher finds out he has cancer and cooks meth to pay his family's bills. American Gods, there's a war between the old gods and the new gods, which doesn't really mean anything if you don't set up the distinction. So, okay, see, the old gods are like Norse and Russian and African gods that aren't really worshipped anymore, while the new gods are things like media and technology. And they're at war because Wednesday anyway, the main character has no experience with this world or knowledge of it. Nobody tells him anything, and he just kind of goes along with it because I guess he has nothing else better to do. But of course, there's a lot more to good story than plot. The best logline in the world won't save you from an inconsistent tone if you haven't nailed down the theme. The story of Lost is a group of people trying to get off an island, but it's about finding a balance between knowledge and faith, in the same way that Breaking Bad is about the corruptive potential of power. Theme is the spine of narrative, without which all stories would just be gelatinous sacks of character and plot flailing wildly in a darkened room without purpose or meaning. And it's not enough just to understand your theme, you need to understand how your plot, your characters, and your setting all relate back to your theme, how they are expressions of it, how they collide with it, how they both support and undermine it. Lost is meticulously plotted and characterized, drifting from genre to genre and playing with narrative conventions, not for its own sake, but because the showrunners felt that such a method could express their theme in an interesting, powerful, and surprising way. Breaking Bad, on the other hand, lives with its protagonist and makes sure that we are in his corner throughout his journey so that by the time he's choosing to have people killed, we fail to see these acts as immoral. It isn't just that the writing is good or that the acting is good, it's that all of these elements are particularly suited for the thematic spine of the show. And the key to understanding American Gods doesn't lie with what happens in the plot. What happens is only important insofar as it provides for us a window into the ideas of the world this story inhabits. Meaning it's less important to show that in episode 2 Wednesday is trying to recruit Chernobog than it is to express that Chernobog and the Zoria sisters exist at all. Which is why in this episode seemingly about said recruitment, there is virtually no discussion of the details of Wednesday's plan. To tell this story well, it isn't enough just to write good dialogue or cast good actors. You have to create an atmosphere and a texture which convey the sense of a world which is very close to ours, but is somehow
A world under a world.
But to really nail down the theme, let's look at a convenient expression that's absent from films: the title sequence. It's a nice quick shorthand that reminds the audience of the themes of the show before they go into an episode. The content of a title sequence is the easiest way to intuit what the showrunners think their story is about, especially in today's world of elaborately produced, independently commissioned introductions. Studio Elastic, which produced the title sequences for True Detective and Game of Thrones, among others, also crafted that of American Gods, and I think the comparison is enlightening. According to the titles, Game of Thrones is about the cities of Westeros and how they relate to one another, while True Detective is about how our protagonists are shaped and molded by the environment of Louisiana. So what does the title sequence for American Gods present? A totem pole, made up of vastly different yet inextricable symbols. A pyramid guarded by eye dogs, a menorah made of audio jacks, an astronaut crucified. There's no indication of character, setting, or plot because these details are incidental to the thematic spine. What the showrunners decided was most important to remind you of at the beginning of an episode is how ideas, old and new, collide, and how they are less like oil and water than coffee and cream, becoming permanently mixed in this strange philosophical melting pot that is America.
Tell you what, I'll give you a lucky coin back when you tell me how you plucked it out of thin air.
I plucked it out of thin air. Is how I plucked it out of thin air, you bug-eating nonce. Now give me my coin.
For all the ballyhoo I've made about Shadow being disconnected from the plot in the book, he's practically reactionless. For the series, the showrunners made the choice to spend more time letting Shadow react to the creeping weirdness of the world he finds himself in. By episode 6, Shadow finally gets fed up with the mystique and violence about him and starts demanding answers, which is what you want from your protagonist. But remember that this is at the 6th hour of the series, 310 minutes in. In a typical network show, this moment demanding clarity would probably happen happen in the climax of episode 1. Ideally, your first episode sets up all the most important ideas and characters of your series, and ends with a big exclamation mark that acts as bait for the audience to come back next week. But it isn't enough to have a bang, you also need a moment to breathe and let the information sink. Think of the first episode of Lost, 90 minutes of rising and falling action. Bang! Crashed on an island, save everybody, calm down. Spend some time assessing the situation. Bang! Monster in the woods, calm down. Bang! Radio transmission, translate it, calm down. Oh, there's been someone on the island for at least 40 years. That's, what a mystery, huh? Wow! It isn't enough that these big dramatic moments happen, it's that we get moments of quiet contemplation afterwards where the characters mirror us, the audience, and asking, what does this mean?
Guys, where are we?
Now think of the first episode of American Gods. Shadow is being interrogated by the technical boy. Bam! Thrown out of the VR limo. He's beaten and lynched. Moment of silence. Bam! His assailant seemed to spontaneously erupt into blood and viscera! And then the episode ends. Episode 2 picks up with Shadow in the hospital getting his wound stapled shut, followed by him incredulously asking Wednesday what he knows about what just happened. Wednesday doesn't answer any of his questions, but Shadow also gives up pretty quick. You might think like, hey, wait, shouldn't he just put his foot down and just demand answers? And that's the thing, Shadow at this point in the series is struggling to understand the reality of what's happening to him. His journey into the realm of gods versus gods isn't just becoming acquainted with them personally or in accepting that gods can be real and all that that implies. His personal journey through the first season is accepting that these things can be happening to him, that he isn't delusional for wanting to believe his own eyes. As time goes on, more impossible things start happening. He sees the hammer of Chernobog bleed, he seems to make it snow in Chicago, and soon enough his wife comes back from the dead. Having a hero come to terms with impossible things is nothing new, but Shadow is a fascinating variation on this trope in the way that the impossible is a reflection of his own nothingness as a character. His conflict isn't, I have to accept that the impossible is possible, it's what's possible is impossible, so why do I believe it?
Did I make snow?
Well, if you choose to believe you made snow, then you get to live the rest of your life believing that you can do things that are impossible. Or you can believe it's a delusion.
No, see, the delusions feel real, okay? That's why it's a delusion. None of this feels real. It feels like a dream.
I don't know why Shadow believes, but I believe it because of the atmosphere and texture of the show. When I talk about atmosphere and texture, I'm referring to a particularly effective blend of set design, art direction, lighting, and cinematography. In the simplest terms, the goal seems to have been to create a world which had weight and felt lived in. The showrunners wanted to emphasize the physical reality of the objects and spaces being filmed, which is why everything is so rough, so contrasty. But we have to return again to our spine, this combination of disparate ideas. When Shadow asks Wednesday where all this was before they met, this referring to, this. Wednesday responds,
On the periphery, just outside, there's always a window. People are frightened to look through it.
On the periphery, just outside. This is a world where the mythical exists in the darkened corners of our everyday lives, part of what we know, but somehow obscured from view. So if we were to show the melding of seemingly contradictory ideas to show how an aging god of evil can reside comfortably in a downtown Chicago apartment, we need to see that there is more room for the extraordinary in our lives than we might otherwise expect. To that end, let's look at episode 2 and the introduction of the Zoria sisters and Chernobog. We first get what might be described as an establishing shot of Chicago as it stands on a globe. Now this could have been a map, especially as we've already established the use of maps this episode, but a globe allows for topographical texture as well as colorfully distinct representations of states and the vein-like highways that run across them. Now the dot that represents Chicago fades into the keyhole of a bolt lock. The key turns, we see the inside of the lock, and the score replaces the actual noises of the spinning mechanism with orchestrated percussion. And And then Wednesday announces himself, and we're pulled back to this medium shot of Zoria Veternaya. So this is a 14-second long sequence meant to ground us in Chicago, but think of how this exact moment would be done in virtually any other show. An extreme wide of the city with some recognizable building in full view, or failing that, a subtitle telling you exactly where you are, followed by a wide shot of the building where most of our action will take place, followed then by a medium wide inside the building that gives us a sense of the space, which finally yields to an actor walking on screen, probably on the phone in a bathrobe. This is the standard Hollywood formula for establishing place, front-loading the audience with detailed geographical information so that the filmmakers never have to address it again. It's very Spartan, efficient filmmaking. But think about what American Gods is accomplishing with its own version of this sequence. So we're told explicitly that we're in Chicago, but in a way that makes us think of its relationship with the rest of the country, and through a medium that emphasizes how we abstract physical reality to make it easier to parse. I mean, if they just shown me an image of downtown Chicago, I probably wouldn't have known what to feel, but isn't it strange that Chicago's place on a globe is so much more understandable? And then this fade gives us a sense that the importance of Chicago is not in its buildings or its people, but in the secrets it hides behind locked doors. Secrets which are conveniently open to us as viewers. But it all happens so fast that it can be hard to know exactly what to feel besides just a distinct unease. And this is where the sound design is so important. What we hear feels appropriate, it matches the images on screen, but it still feels wrong, otherworldly. This medium shot kind of comes as a relief, like a return to something normal, something we can understand, and that is the purpose of atmosphere and texture. By highlighting these details with a surreal twist, it tricks you into simultaneously believing and disbelieving in what you see. Now compare this effect to when we see the new gods in their spaces, sterile, white, smooth, new, and without imperfection. The old gods have cracked faces, strange voices, while the new gods are perfectly smooth and have voices like honey. You get a sense that the new gods can fit in anywhere they please, but the old gods have to find dusty nooks to hide themselves in, places that have been, like the gods themselves, abandoned.
You deserve better than this.
You don't like it? You sleep on floor. It's good enough for me.
The cinematography of American Gods is pretty standard. By no means artless, but 90% of it is your typical wide, close-up, shot-reverse shot cycle. This deliberately comfortable style is used to manipulate the audience, to lull us into a false sense of security. Like here, where Shadow is standing in the hallway for all of 2 seconds before we see that hours must have passed. Or here, when Shadow puts out the cigarette he apparently plucked from Chernobog's mouth, even though we never saw it and it never feels like he came close enough to do so. And let's just take a second here to mourn the inevitable death of Peter Stormare by lung cancer, because holy hell! But the other 10% that isn't normal is where a lot of the magic lives. So you get these sudden close-ups like the jukebox in episode 1 or the turning key in episode 2, which put an unexpected emphasis on mechanisms we might take for granted. As Shadow becomes more immersed in this strange world, these transitions become even more fanciful, like the car driving over fields of marshmallows or the copy machine forming ice crystals, which you might observe are dreamlike representations of disparate ideas colliding with one another. So you'll have this scene with Shadow mourning his wife, feeling as normal as it could, and then he flips this magical coin onto her grave and suddenly the music turns foreboding and we watch it fall in dramatic close-up. You get this scene of Shadow going through his home for the first time since getting out of prison, tasked with packing up his wife's possessions, and we see time pass rapidly behind a memory of Laura, light rake by her bed impossibly. The show has a playful disregard of standard continuity, where the normal suddenly transitions into the surreal at a moment's notice, keeping us ill at ease even when nothing untoward is happening. But that sense of play gets to even more basic filmmaking elements. So like most of the series is shot in a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is standard widescreen, but some sequences are shot on an anamorphic lens, giving it an aspect ratio of 2:40. In episode 4, the anamorphic look crushes Laura within the confines of her suburban banality, but after she returns to life, we return to 16:9, which mirrors that the first time she's truly on the same page as Shadow is in death. In the first Coming to America sequence in episode 1, there's a moment where the Norsemen have a small war amongst themselves, and it's just a violent bloodbath, and then someone's arm gets chopped off and sent flying so high, in fact, that it extends outside the frame and into the letterbox. And then there's the use of subtitles, like in the introduction to Bilquis in episode 1, where the words "somewhere in America" are imposed over the skyline of Hollywood. We know exactly where in America Hollywood is, but the "somewhere in America" creates the sense of a narrator directing our attention, reminding us that we aren't here coincidentally. Then you get this scene in episode 3 where Salim and the Jinn speak to each other in Arabic, and these subtitles are simultaneously English and Arabic, reminding us, like with the calligraphy that begins the first episode, of the physical presence of a language, that these words are related to our culture in a very specific and meaningful way. But none of this is to imply that the art resides only in that weird 10%. Look at this scene in episode 1 where Shadow and Wednesday discuss the terms of their partnership. So first and most basically, it's worth remembering that this is a set designed and built for the show, which means all of the props and lights, etc. are placed very intentionally. There's no coincidence here. So we have Shadow's back to a dark wall. Left of frame, there are hundreds of indistinct pictures, and on the right, there's a lone illuminated dartboard above which is an alligator frame filled with white string lights. Looking towards Wednesday, he has the depth of the entire bar behind him, along with the very subtle symbolism of a gaping alligator maw whose teeth are made of light. So this all feels like a real space, but it also plays out as a visual representation of their internal states. So why are the lights important? Well, American Gods has a theme which I've come to call God space, where they explicitly tied the supernatural elements of the gods to a vague nebula of stars and stardust. You have the vagina prison of Bilquis, the duet of Anubis, Zoria Polnachnia's impossible rooftop watching the bear in the sky, and the strange astral desert where Salim and the Jinn make love. The gods are associated with the stars, so it's only fitting that when we get into a close-up here in Jack's crocodile bar, all we can see behind Wednesday, besides the people that he might manipulate for his own ends, are the glow of many indistinct points of light. Shadow, meanwhile, is intermittently framed with complete darkness to reflect the nothing that he believes, or the wall of pictures showing his inability to let go of his old life or make sense of it in this new context, and then sometimes with the few string lights creeping in behind him to show the growing presence of the gods in his world. Now look at this scene in episode 5 where Shadow interrogates Laura about the fact that she isn't dead anymore. Here, both Laura and Shadow are shown with the stark vertical lines behind them, symbolizing for Shadow his release from prison failing to have released him from the torment of where he left his life, and Laura's own unexpected imprisonment to Shadow through the magic of the sun coin. Later in this same scene, Laura sits in a black bathtub mirroring the hot tub she would get high in when she was alive, while Shadow is ringed by starbursts reminiscent of Catholic depictions of God's light. All of these background details help to subliminally reinforce the power dynamics at play in a conversation. None of this is strictly necessary for good television. Plenty of award-winning films don't even have touches like these. But because American Gods is such an odd story and Shadow such a challenging protagonist, the showrunners have to utilize every aspect of the medium to fill their world with atmosphere and texture enough to grab the audience by the throat. There's never a lazy choice or an easy shortcut, and not every hit lands, obviously, but what's so wonderful about the execution is that even when moments fail, they're still experimenting with form, still trying to be something more. Returning at last to Blake Snyder and Save the Cat, it's safe to say that American Gods breaks many of Snyder's rules, but I would argue that the spirit of those rules remains intact. The truth is, there's no advice that is 100% applicable to all authors. Any manifesto in any medium claiming to lay out a perfect law of success may as well be a roadmap for an artist to succeed by doing the opposite. The point is that you need to be aware of how your story differs from the norm, the challenges it poses to traditional storytelling practices. It isn't a cardinal sin necessarily to have an inactive protagonist as long as that inactivity is intentional. The only true cardinal sin is bad writing. Hello everybody, and thanks for watching that video. Gosh, American Gods is good. I kind of just want to talk about it forever, but there's just no time. I release a new video every 2 weeks. I also have a Patreon where I post occasional blog things about my opinions because you need more of that in your life. $5 a month patrons get access to my notes and scripts and unused video material. I took like 10 pages worth of notes for this video, so if you're the kind of person who's interested in the behind the scenes aspect of YouTube stuff, then that's definitely the ticket for you. And then I'm on Twitter because everybody's on Twitter. You don't need me me to tell you about Twitter. Anyway, tune in 2 weeks, or tomorrow, or right now, depending on when in time you're viewing this video. I hope you're having a good, grand, great old good day, and someday I will give you a hug, or I won't. There's really no telling. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.